Hello, welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. For over 5 years, Iraq has gripped the attention of the world media. Journalists have reported on every aspect of arguably the biggest story of the 21st century. But are we getting an accurate picture of events in Iraq? What role, if any, did the American media play in the run-up to the war? Could the war have been averted with more accurate coverage? And have journalists and editors mixed personal ideologies and national interest in covering the story of Iraq?
The Iraq War has put the role of the media under close scrutiny. The war has highlighted stark differences in media perspectives across the world. What the American public saw on their TV screens was often vastly different from what audiences in the Middle East viewed on Arabic satellite channels. Critics say that the period of time between the 9/11 attacks and the invasion of Iraq represents one of the greatest collapses in the history of the American media. They claim that the American media effectively galvanized public opinion that led the US and its allies to go to war.
There's no question that an intimidating atmosphere, coercive atmosphere, was created, systematically, deliberately created to help in the job of mobilizing American media behind this effort to persuade the American people that there was a compelling reason, a compelling need for the United States to invade Iraq.
6 years into the war, questions are still being asked if the media has provided fair and objective reporting in Iraq. The US has often accused Arabic language channels of being selective in their news coverage and whipping up anti-American sentiments. However, similar charges have been levelled against the US media, accused of supporting the American occupation of Iraq by providing half-truths about the violence and chaos in the country.
Most media narratives about the war in Iraq tend to focus on immediate issues, tactics, how the war is being fought, and so forth. There's very little discussion. There is some, but there is relatively little discussion in the media about deeper questions relating to the war, why the U.S. is in there at all, why American lives are being sacrificed, why huge sums of money that the U.S. is spending. It should be on the front burner. It should be a matter of enormous importance in the media and elsewhere, but that's not the case.
The US media, which stands accused of not doing enough before the war, today seems to be taking a more rigorous editorial position. In a world of satellite TV channels, internet access, web blogs and citizen journalism, where media technology has facilitated the dissemination of news and information, the focus on Iraq and how it is reported is more intense than ever.
In this episode, we are looking for 3 different perspectives. I am delighted to welcome from Washington, D.C., Robert Dreyfuss, who is an independent journalist, and from Tel Aviv by Akiva Eldar, a senior columnist with the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and from Cairo by Cairo bureau chief of the UAE newspaper The National, Nadia Abul Majd. Welcome to Inside Iraq. Akiva Eldar, as a senior columnist and a reporter on Iraq, when you write, do you look at Iraq through the prism of the Israeli national interest? Is Akiva Eldar sits and writes as Akiva or as an Israeli?
Good question. Both. First of all, of course, my readers are interested in Iraq as a neighboring country, as an Arab country, as a potential partner for peace, maybe even as an oil supplier. You know, after the war, we were even playing with the idea to reopen the old oil pipeline from Iraq to Haifa. So naturally, what a newspaper wants to offer its readers is information which is relevant to them, and people, of course, are looking into what's in it for them once we will be able to establish normal relationship with Iraq. As a political analyst, I see Iraq as a member of the Arab League, which has launched the Arab Peace Initiative after the Saudi Peace Initiative back in March 2002, and as also a country that will affect the stability in the Middle East. But on the other hand, I'm also asking myself, how can Israel contribute by pursuing the peace process with the Palestinians or with the Syrians to help our American friends to put an end to their problems in Iraq, because it's very clear to us Israelis that what's good for America is good for Israel.
The frankness, as articulated by Akiva, is rather refreshing. That begs the question, did the American journalists roll over for President Bush on the eve of the war, Robert?
There's no question that the media, despite maybe some early suspicions, were completely in the tank, swallowed hook, line, and sinker the president's initial rationalization for why we had to go to Iraq. President Bush claimed that Iraq was a mortal threat that had weapons of mass destruction, that was in league with al-Qaeda, and of course he implied that Iraq has some relationship to what happened on September 11th. All of this was completely bogus, and you can discuss whether it was a lie or whether it was an error. But in either case, the media didn't challenge the facts. Now, personally, I was involved on the other side of that. I wrote a number of articles, the first profile of Ahmed Shalabi, for instance, in the American media, and other pieces about the war between the Pentagon and the CIA, with this, over whether it was a good idea to attack Iraq and so forth. The media caved in entirely and became a cheerleader for the war. They succumbed to this patriotic, even jingoistic march to war that took place up until the war. Afterwards, as it became clear that the war was bogging down and the weapons of mass destruction didn't show up and so forth, the media began to do its job. Unfortunately now, today I would say, the American media has almost eliminated Iraq from its pages. Today the New York Times doesn't have a single story about Iraq.
I shall come to that decline in the coverage, as well as perhaps ostensibly the interest of the American public in Iraq. You've been to Iraq several times, I think 6 times, before and after the war. When you look at Iraq, how do you look at it again? Are you looking at it through the eyes of an Arab journalist, or as an independent journalist? How do you look at it?
What I've always believed in, even without Iraq, that journalists should try as much as possible to be objective, regardless of nationality. I was very interested to see what's in Iraq. I was more, maybe as an Arab in this sense, I was more skeptic about this weapons of mass destruction, and I was amazed how it was taken sort of like for granted by many international media, which is usually like more critical and all of that. But even I was in Iraq during when like the inspectors were there and stuff, and everybody was sort of like, the question was not whether they have weapons of mass destruction or not. It was like, where are we going to find them? So I think this has changed. And every time I went to Iraq, it was sort of like a different story. And I think we also, or maybe you said that we are going to talk about this later, about the coverage, that how now even many journalists who are in Iraq are not actually in the street, and how this is sort of must be affecting their reporting and for the violence and for the dangers that are in there. But again, to go back to the beginning of your question, I had sort of like mixed feelings about, I had no illusion about who Saddam was and what he did to the Iraqi people, but I was not sure that this was the right way to take him out of power and of the implications.
So you looked at Iraq as a total and separated it from Saddam Hussein. Saddam might be a brutal dictator, but you knew in advance that the destruction to Iraq might be far wider than people anticipated. Akiva Dar, there is some sort of correlation between the American occupation of Iraq and the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Do you relate to that? Do you kind of make a comparison?
I think that the American occupation and specifically the violation of human rights in Iraq itself or in Guantanamo makes it, in a way, consciously or unconsciously, easier for the Israelis to live with the occupation and violation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. Without even having to mention it, now it's easier to defend.
So if
That's
the
not something
Americans
that
are
I
doing
do.
it, then it is okay for the Israelis to do it too. Is that it?
Actually, in a way, it makes people feel more comfortable because we are looking at America as the icon of the struggle for human rights and democracy in the Middle East. So you don't need to mention it, but it's there. It's up there, and it makes people in Israel make them feel a little better with the occupation. And I think that in a way, it makes it more difficult for the Americans to put pressure on Israel and to twist Israeli arms when it comes to violation of human rights, settlements, checkpoints, roadblocks, because perhaps they don't like to be faced with questions. Who are you to tell us? Who are you? What you're doing in Iraq is much worse than what we are doing here. So, of course, it has a clear effect, and it's right there.
Akiva, thank you for that comment. When we come back, I'm going to ask Robert Dreyfuss what lies behind the decline in the American interest in the story of Iraq. Stay with us.
War fatigue also struck journalists who find it hard to translate the ongoing battles to an American audience caught between an economic downturn and a pending presidential election. American Journalism Review.